Small business owners across Canada are calling it an absolute nightmare. And it's all thanks to Trump's trade war move that's crushing international sellers on platforms like Etsy.
On this Saturday night, a U.S. court shakes up Trump's trade war. The legal battles ahead after most of America's tariffs are ruled unlawful.
President Trump's tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional.
And the uncertainties and possibilities for Canada's economy. Visas denied for attending the United Nations. How the U.S. is blunting attempts to recognize Palestinian statehood. Plus, who says big box stores can't succeed? An iconic retail brand is making a comeback. And the end of summer is in the air. The sky-high sights and sounds at the Canadian National Exhibition.
Global National. Reporting tonight, Eric Sorensen.
Good evening, and thanks for joining us. U.S. President Donald Trump is vowing to fight back after a federal appeals court ruled his sweeping import tariffs are illegal, saying he exceeded his emergency powers. For now, the duties remain in place as the case heads to the U.S. Supreme Court. But changes could be on the horizon. Mackenzie Gray breaks down what this means for Canada and the future of U.S. trade in tonight's top story.
For the first time since Tuesday, President Donald Trump in public, off to play golf on Labor Day weekend after the centerpiece of his political and economic agenda was dealt a potential major blow.
The bottom line is 7 judges recognized today that President Trump's tariffs are illegal and unconstitutional.
The judges from the Federal Circuit Appeals Court voting in a split decision that Donald Trump's reciprocal and fentanyl tariffs went beyond the authority delegated to the president under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, saying the president required congressional approval to implement them. But there's one catch. The court ruled that the tariffs can stay in place until October 14th.
What we're witnessing is the complete unraveling of a system that allowed small entrepreneurs to thrive. And it's hitting hardest where Trump probably never intended. Meet Doris Kauchenek, a retired woodworker from Ottawa who turned her basement hobby into a thriving business selling handmade walnut candle holders and housewares. Her Etsy shop is 4 years old and was on track to hit 1,000 sales this year. But then Trump's trade policies hit like a sledgehammer. The U.S. market, which had been essentially an extension of her domestic market, suddenly became a bureaucratic minefield. For years, the de minimis rule allowed packages worth $800 or less to enter the U.S. duty-free with minimal paperwork. This wasn't some obscure loophole. It was a deliberate policy designed to facilitate small-scale international trade. The rule had been around since the 1930s, originally set at much lower thresholds, but was raised to $800 in 2016 to accommodate the boom in online shopping. The system worked beautifully for small sellers. Canadian Etsy vendors like Kauchenek could ship products directly to American customers without worrying about complex customs forms, broker fees, or tariff calculations. Most Canadian sellers on Etsy had about 90% exposure to the U.S. market, making America their primary customer base. But it was real, and it was about to get much worse.
Okay, well, let's go to results. Right now, we have the best trade deal of any country in the world. Okay, those are results. We think it can be better, and we're working to make it better, but to be absolutely clear, 85% of our trade with the United States is tariff-free. Nobody else is in that position. Our average tariff is about 5.5%. That's the lowest average tariff of any country in the world. So right now we have the best, but we have real issues. Without question, we have real issues in steel, in aluminum, in forest products, in autos, potentially in pharma, copper, some other sectors. So there's these strategic sectors that the U.S. has focused on, where we have.
The trade relationship between Canada and the United States has always been complex, but recent developments have shaken the foundation of cross-border commerce that small businesses relied upon. But Trump had other plans.
We have trillions of dollars coming into our country. If we didn't have tariffs, we would be a very poor nation, and we would be taken advantage of by every other nation in the world, friend and foe. We're not going to let that happen. And we have a very, very big case in the Supreme Court. Our country has a chance to be unbelievably rich again, but it can also be unbelievably poor again. If we don't win that case, our country is going to suffer so greatly.
in a series of executive orders throughout 2025, he systematically dismantled this system. First came tariffs on China in February, then the elimination of de minimis for Chinese goods in May, and finally, the killer blow, the complete suspension of de minimis for all countries on August 29, 2025. The impact has been devastating. Canadian Etsy sellers now face the threat of 35% tariffs on handmade jewelry and crafts. When Kochenek first learned about the changes, her reaction was disbelief. No, that can't possibly be. But the new reality was undeniable. To understand the scale of this disruption, consider the numbers. The U.S. processes nearly 4 million de minimis shipments daily. That's 92% of all cargo entering the country. These shipments grew from 134 million in 2015 to over 1.36 billion in 2024. The value of de minimis processing had reached over $65 billion annually. Trump's justification centered on national security and drug trafficking concerns. The administration pointed out that 90% of all cargo seizures in fiscal year 2024 came from de minimis shipments, including 98% of narcotic seizures and 97% of counterfeit items. They argued that companies like Temu and Shein were exploiting the system to flood American markets with cheap goods. But here's where Trump's policy becomes particularly rural. It's hitting the wrong targets.
Deal. We've seen examples of deals that would not work for Canada. We are focused on making sure two things. One, we control the things we control, knocking down barriers inside Canada, making sure we got tax breaks for Canadians, making sure that industry is getting support. And two, a fair negotiation with the United States that, again, is productive. Canadians appreciate this is complicated. Canadians appreciate that this is ongoing, but they also appreciate that Canadians are not going to settle for a bad deal. They're going to get a good deal. And that's what these negotiations are all about.
And I do appreciate the complexity of this as well. But when you say no capitulation, never, we removed the DST just to keep those negotiations going. The United States didn't remove something at the same time. We removed those counter tariffs on compliant goods with the USMCA or the CUSMA, but they didn't reduce tariffs on steel and aluminum.
While major retailers like Shein and Temu have the resources to adapt, they've already started bulk shipping to U.S. warehouses and adjusting their business models. Small sellers like Kochenek are left scrambling. Canadian officials have made it clear they won't capitulate to pressure, even as they work to protect their industries from the fallout. The new system is a bureaucratic nightmare. Sellers must now provide detailed manufacturer information, 10-digit HTS codes for every product, and navigate complex duty calculations. For vintage or antique sellers, this is nearly impossible. How do you determine the country of origin for a 50-year-old item that lacks clear labeling? Cindy Baldassi, who runs a small jewelry business called Cindy Lu Hu & Calgary, describes the previous system as seamless. She could ship handmade jewelry to U.S. customers without thinking about customs forms or broker fees. Now, she says, some people feel their businesses are over, especially those who are using yarn and fabric, very little of which is going to be made in Canada or even in the United States. The shipping industry is in chaos. Etsy suspended shipping label purchases for Canada Post, Australia Post, and other carriers for U.S.-bound packages, citing the inability of these services to handle the new requirements. eBay warned users about the significant risk of non-compliant shipments being returned to sender. Some Canadian sellers are desperately trying to use USMCA trade agreement exemptions to avoid tariffs. Products certified to originate within the US, Mexico, or Canada can still avoid duties. But the certification process is, in Kochenek's words, an absolute nightmare, a term she repeats multiple times when describing the paperwork required to document the original source of materials. Even for sellers who manage to get USMCA certification, many are still stuck. Craft, ears using imported materials, yarn from overseas, fabric from Asia, jewelry findings from China, find that their North American products don't qualify because the raw materials originated elsewhere. The financial impact is staggering.
Strategic Response Fund to help Canadian businesses adapt, diversify, and build that new economy. This fund has three core objectives. First, to help businesses pivot to new products and markets. Secondly, to retrain and retain skills and production here in Canada. And thirdly, to make our businesses globally competitive. So businesses can use these funds to invest in the design of new products, to retool their plants to boost productivity, or to offset the costs of accessing new markets. And the fund will be open to all sectors, given the fact that the tariff impacts are wide-ranging across Canadian industries. La priorité sera accordée aux projets issus des secteurs les plus touchés par les tarifs, comme l'acier, l'aluminium, l'automobile et le bois d'œuvre. Les fonds de réponse stratégique travaillera en étroite collaboration avec nos nouvelles alliances sectorielles pour s'assurer que ces projets d'investissement ne soient pas freinés.
According to trade attorney Marianne Rowden, small and medium-sized businesses may face over $71 billion in new costs. For individual sellers, the math is brutal. A $200 order of specialty paper from Hong Kong that would have previously arrived duty-free now costs around $460, a 130% increase. The Canadian government has announced strategic response funds to help businesses adapt. But for many small sellers, it's too little too late. Trump's tariff structure adds insult to injury. The new system imposes flat fees based on the country's tariff rate, $80 per item for countries with tariff rates under 16%, $160 for rates between 16% and 25%, and $200 for rates above 25%. After 6 months, even these flat fees disappear, replaced by percentage-based tariffs that could be even higher. For small sellers operating on thin margins, these costs are often impossible to absorb. They're forced to either raise prices, potentially pricing themselves out of the market, or eat the costs and watch their profits evaporate. The irony is palpable. Trump claimed he was protecting American small businesses from unfair foreign competition.
100% tariffs, and I'll give you an example. Harley Davidson couldn't sell into India. There was a 200% tariff on a motorcycle. So what happens? Harley Davidson went to India and built a motorcycle plant. And now they don't have to pay tariffs. Same thing as us. So what we're doing is...
Instead, he's destroyed an ecosystem that allowed thousands of small entrepreneurs on both sides of the border to thrive. American consumers lose access to unique, handmade products they can't find domestically. Internation. How small business owners lose their primary market. Meanwhile, the big players Trump claimed to be targeting are adapting just fine. Shein and Temu announced price increases but promised to minimize the impact on consumers. They have the scale and resources to navigate the new system. It's the one-person operations, the retirees turning hobbies into businesses, the craft makers working from their basements who are getting crushed. The policy also reveals the fundamental misunderstanding of modern e-commerce. The de minimis rule wasn't primarily about Chinese manufacturers gaming the system. It was about facilitating legitimate small-scale international trade. By eliminating it entirely, Trump has thrown the baby out with the bathwater. Shipping experts predict transaction volumes from high-tariff countries could drop by 50% or more. The entire online marketplace ecosystem that took decades to build is being dismantled in a matter of months. Some sellers are pivoting to focus on domestic markets. Cal Green, who owns the Ottawa streetwear label Raised by Wolves, is shifting his focus to Canadian customers. I definitely can't foot the bill for increased tariffs, he says. American customers are going to have to pay one way or another. U.S. sales currently make up 25% of his business, but that's likely to change dramatically. For many others, there's no viable pivot. Their products were specifically designed for the American market, their customer base is primarily American, and their business models depended on the seamless cross-border trade that de minimis enabled. The human cost of these policies is real and immediate. These aren't abstract economic statistics. They're real people whose livelihoods are being destroyed by poorly thought-out trade policies. Kochanek's retirement business, Baldassi's jewelry shop, countless other small operations that provided supplemental income or creative fulfillment, are all casualties of Trump's trade war. What makes this particularly galling is that it was entirely avoidable. More targeted approaches could have addressed legitimate concerns about drug trafficking and counterfeit goods without destroying the legitimate small business ecosystem. Enhanced screening, better data requirements, or country-specific restrictions could have achieved Trump's stated goals without the collateral damage. Instead, we're witnessing the dismantling of one of the most successful examples of international e-commerce cooperation. The de minimis rule had created a thriving ecosystem where small businesses could access global markets, consumers could access unique products, and cross-border trade flourished. Trump's tariff policies are being challenged in court, but the damage is already done. Even if some of these policies are eventually overturned, the disruption to small businesses is immediate and devastating. Trust in the system has been shattered, business relationships have been severed, and entire business models have been rendered obsolete overnight. The ultimate irony is that Trump, who campaigned on supporting American workers and small businesses, has created a system that primarily benefits large corporations with the resources to navigate complex trade regulations, while crushing the small entrepreneurs who embody the American dream, even when they happen to live across the border. As Baldassi puts it, she feels for vendors outside the U.S. who have built their businesses around serving American customers, only to have the rug pulled out from under them by policies that seem designed more for political theater than economic sense. This isn't just about trade policy, it's about the human cost of poorly designed government interventions that destroy thriving ecosystems in pursuit of political points. And the small business owners paying the price deserve better than being collateral damage in Trump's trade war.